Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video. In this video, I'll be talking about Red Dead Redemption 2, which is a game that I played around the time of its original release, but haven't touched it since. But recently, I had the itch to play the game again, and I liked it. I liked it a lot more than I did the first time, from a gameplay perspective and also from a narrative perspective, though I still don't think it's perfect. So here I'm going to give my updated thoughts on the game. When I initially played the game, I took my time getting from place to place. I sometimes indulged in some of the side activities. But on my most recent playthrough, I just rushed through the entire game. I skipped most of the cutscenes, just played it all the way through, and I liked it more that way. I feel like the game has so much filler in the main story that doing the side content on top of that really makes you tired of the game. But to play the game in a much more streamlined way is the best way to play the game in my opinion. Especially because most of the story is told throughout the gameplay, and most of the cutscenes, in particular towards the middle of the game, are really just introductions to what you're going to be doing in these missions that don't really affect the overall narrative. So I didn't really feel like I missed much by skipping most of the cutscenes, and it really fastened up the pace of the game. The gameplay itself still has its issues for me. This game gets a lot of praise for being one of the most realistic games, having so many different systems in the game that dictate all the different stats, like your stats of your gun, the stamina of your horse. I mean, you could upgrade your camp. There's just so many things that you can micromanage throughout the game, but thankfully this game doesn't force you to do those things for a lot of the different systems. However, one thing that you do really need to take care of is stamina, and that gets really annoying. There's so many points where I was just like stuck in the middle of nowhere because my horse ran out of stamina and I had barely any food to give it, so I had to just sit there waiting for its stamina to go back up. And even if I had food to give it, it would like run out of stamina by the next minute anyway. And this happens a lot towards the end of the game, because in the end of the game there's a lot of going back and forth between the Indian Preservation, which is all the way on the other side of the map. And while you could fast travel there, you can't fast travel back, so it gets really annoying every single time you do one of those missions. The controls themselves are still a bit clunky to me. I don't love that you have to constantly bash on the X button to run. And then the driving controls just aren't nearly as precise as I would like them to be. But I definitely had an easier time playing this game this time than the last. Now moving on to the mission structure, which is probably one of my biggest issues with the game, and to be honest, just with Rockstar games in general, because their games are just so bloated. This game is so bloated with pointless missions and plot lines throughout that pretty much double the length of this game's story mode. So many of these main missions just feel like side missions, in particular the ones in chapters 2 and 3, as you spend most of your time doing useless jobs helping out your gang with little progression to the main narrative. But to be fair, on the replay, I felt like Chapter 2 was a bit more tolerable, both in terms of the quality of the missions and also in terms of repetitiveness. By Chapter 3, it did get pretty repetitive. I mean, not to say that these are bad missions, because there are very few missions in the actual game that I would call bad. It's just that this section of the game goes on for so long, without any major event in the main narrative happening, which makes it feel like you're just doing the same thing over and over and over again. But now for the narrative, which is something I really respect, as I find it astonishing how masterful this story is written, especially as a prequel to Red Dead 1. Which to me, I always felt like Red Dead 1 felt like a sequel to a story we never got. It always feels like they're always referencing something that you feel like you should know, but you don't. But I feel like this game does such a great job at connecting the two stories, though there are some plot holes, as you would expect with a story that wasn't planned out. But these holes are mostly minor and don't really affect my overall experience. I really love the way they connect the stories of John Marston and Arthur Morgan, though it is obviously kind of dumb that Arthur is never mentioned in Red Dead 1 by John, considering how big of an impact Arthur had on his life and how much he mentions him at the end of 2, but whatever. Now, after playing Red Dead 2 for the first time, I think I was still on board with John Marston being the better character of the two, but after some reflection, also after having played the game again, I don't even think there's really any doubt in my mind that Arthur Morgan is the better character here. I think he gets a full redemption arc that is executed so perfectly throughout Chapter 6 of the game that leads to one of my favorite death scenes in all of media. But for John, I never felt like he really got his redemption. He was ignorant to think that Ross was going to let him go. And when he wasn't needed anymore, Ross disposed of him. And this led to Jack killing Ross at the end of Red Dead 1, which just repeats the cycle that John was desperately trying to end. And one that Arthur died to help John end as well. So because of that, I do feel like Arthur is a more well-rounded character. For the other characters that were in Red Dead 1, I mean, Javier had almost nothing to do in this game. Bill had an interesting portrayal here. I liked how it lined up with how John and Abigail thought of Bill in Red Dead 1. Uncle was pretty much the same. Abigail was pretty much the same. Though I do think Abigail got more to do in this game, and I think because I do like her more now than I did in Red Dead 1. Jack's portrayal in Red Dead 2 is always so strange to me, as we get the same type of relationship building stuff that we get at the end of Red Dead 1. So it feels a bit inconsistent to have these in both games, and just kind of pointless in Red Dead 2. As you know, it leads to nowhere. And then we got Dutch, who I feel like was masterfully written in this game, showing his descent into madness and then giving him some redemption in the final scene. I thought was really well done, and this leads up perfectly into what happens in Red Dead 1. And I think because of all this, I think he's probably the most complex character in the entire series, with there still being debate on whether he was always that way or whether he changed throughout the course of the game. I love some of the other side characters as well. I love Sadie Adler. I think she's probably one of my favorite characters in the entire series. I like Charles. Charles was fine. And I did think Micah was a pretty good antagonist for the game, even though he was mostly one-dimensional. Now for the actual chapters in the game, something I will give this game credit for is that each chapter does feel completely different than the last for the most part. Chapter 1 takes place mostly during the winter and does a setup for the characters in the gang. Now, chapters 2 and 3 are the ones that I do feel like are the most similar, as they both comprise of really just helping out the gang. But they are in completely different locations. And 3 does have a bit more of a focus on this rivalry between the two families that the gang intervenes in for whatever reason. Chapter 4 involves Saint Denis and the bank robbery. Chapter 5 is on Guarma, which I really hated this section. So pointless to the overall narrative. It's really probably my least favorite section of the entire game, as it literally brings nothing to the table narratively or gameplay wise. And it's just annoying that the thing was there, considering I just feel like it ruins the pacing of the narrative. And then we get to chapter 6, which this is where Arthur learns he has tuberculosis, and he spends the entire chapter trying to redeem himself. At least when he's not involved with the Indians, which again felt so pointless too, especially with Arthur knowing that he's going to be dying soon anyway. So it's like, why is he helping out these Indians? Like, why does he care? But it did improve Dutch's character arc, so at least there's that. It also shows why he is where he is by the time of Red Dead 1. Now here we also get the multiple endings, where the first time I got the good ending, where Arthur helps John and has a pretty perfect death scene. But on the replay, I went for the under ending, and it kind of sucks. Arthur goes back for the money, which kind of ruins his character arc, as, again, why would he need the money? And having Micah kill him just wasn't as poetic to me as the other endings, though I do think it sets up the final confrontation of Micah at the end of the game a bit better, but I do feel like it was fine in the good ending as well. And then we got the epilogue, which I thought was like the cherry on top of this game, where they perfectly connect Red Dead 1 and 2, even though the years are a bit iffy. But seeing John Marston become the man he is by the time of Red Dead 1 was really interesting. Seeing him fix his relationship with Abigail, seeing him buy Beecher's Hope, seeing him kill Micah, and it pretty much just wraps up all the storylines that were set up, and did it in a pretty satisfying way. And I think that's it. From this replay, my respect for this game has just skyrocketed, and I think it ranks easily within my top 10 games of all time. Now, exactly where it ranks within that is still a bit up in the air, but I have such a respect for how this game's narrative acts as a perfect prequel to Red Dead 1, in a way you rarely see. Usually prequels seem to have massive inconsistencies or have less stakes since you know what the outcome is going to be, but I felt like this game perfectly balances that by allowing us to play as Arthur Morgan, a character that wasn't in Red Dead 1, while still including references to what happens later, and also the epilogue section of John Marston, which is such a perfect addition to the game. So yeah, that's my look back on Red Dead Redemption 2. Thank you for watching.